Jayajit Bhattacharya, he's a professor at the IIT, also a former partner at KPMG. Jayajit, will you please explain to me as you see this as, I look at this as a management issue, really. What I see here, the crisis of COVID and the handling of this crisis, I see a big, huge management gap. Do you see the same?
Yeah, for sure. I think sitting in August, I agree with you that things would have been handled better. And if you ask me what needs to be done in August, I can tell you better in the month of September as to what needs to be done, given that hindsight is obviously better. Keep in mind that there was a panic situation in March when we were given a communication that this COVID virus is going to be a massive pandemic and it's going to be extremely destructive in its nature and it's going to spread very, very rapidly. In the face of those half communications, half truths that came out, I think it became a matter of life and death to have an immediate imposition of the lockdown. But clearly, as more information about the pandemic started trickling in, perhaps we could have taken other steps, and perhaps we could have used some of the money that was being pumped into the economy to be distributed in a more direct manner. For example, in the first week of April, when the 23 first tranche of $23 billion was being given out, the money hit the bank accounts of those who really need it very, very quickly. In the first week of April, it hit their bank accounts, and albeit it was very small amounts of rupees 2,000, 3,000, but it did hit them in their bank accounts, and it did provide some level of confidence. However, that is not clearly enough to run an economy, and that is not clearly enough when you've got 26% of the people unemployed in a gap of 2 to 3 months, 2 to 3 weeks. So from a unemployment rate of 6.7%, we hit 26% in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. That's a huge shock. And then we have now gone back to the pre-COVID level of unemployment, but that's still not good enough because it has in its path left a huge amount of destruction. Also, I'm myself not convinced that the unemployment levels have gone back to pre-COVID because there will be a huge amount of underemployment hidden in it. There will be a huge amount of salary cuts hidden in it, and there will be a large number of MSMEs that have got completely destroyed. And therefore, coming back to your question that could we have managed the situation in a better way, had a larger focus on MSMEs? Perhaps yes, but I'm still scratching my head as to what would have been the actual action on the ground. From March onwards, I've been continuously on these debates, and it's been very, very difficult to really say that this tool or that tool would have impacted better, or it would have been better to open up the purse strings more. Keeping in mind that we are still one of the poorest nations in the world. No matter
Right.
we have got
No,
the
no.
$3 trillion
Given that,
economy, or we will hit the $5
Ajay,
trillion economy. Even at 5 trillion,
absolutely.
we will be one of the poorest nations in the world. And therefore, our headspace to really manage the situation from a financial perspective is very, very limited. Also, given the fact that in March we were already facing headwinds in terms of our economy from a normal ceteris paribus situation. On
Mm,
top of it, we got hit by the virus. So it is a really difficult situation to manage. Too many constraints, too many things to balance. Jobs versus life, economy versus death coming from the virus. And even if I look at just pure economic numbers, you've got deaths of over 40,000 people. There is a
right.
value to death also. So if you multiply that value to 40,000, we have already lost a lot of people and a lot of the GDP because of those deaths. If I just keep a non-sentimental view of it and a purely economic view. So at some point in
Mm.
time, and as I said much early in March, that it'll be a race between how many people die of COVID and how many people die because of the economy. Very difficult call to take, Rohit.
And that's why, people vote in governments, Jajit. I worked for a year and a half in producing a film called The Pandemic. It is on Netflix right now. We released it in January, and we said that the pandemic was around the corner. This was the year of the mutation. That's what we're supposed to be working on. As a government, you're expecting. Even when we went out producing this film, there were multiple blocks for us to produce this film. They said, "What are you talking about? A pandemic? It's not here yet." Or, "What are you saying? It's just another year of disease. The mutation will happen and we'll deal with it." And we said no, but this is the year of the mutation. And so uh, obviously when we released the film on 20th 22nd January 2020, and ever since then it's really unfolded, and people said, oh yeah, you were talking about it. So I think at some level we can always continue saying that, and that we could have done a better job, and obviously next month we'll know better. But really, that's what you invest in, and that's why people pay their taxes to you, to make sure that you deliver. You're an administrative service at the end of the day, and you must work on the future rather than working just on the present. It cannot just be reactive all the time. And I think one of our challenges, again, Jajit, and as you said rightly, is going to understand how you will resurrect the MSME sector. I was with somebody just yesterday. He's about 1,100 people. He had today. He's fired about 920 of them. He's left with just the balance of 180. Now, he said, I don't know where that 20,000 crore that was promised is gone. I don't see it. I've had to shut down multiple businesses. I have received no money so far, nothing for paying to my employees, nothing to sustain my business. He's still making losses. And he's continuing to think about, should he shut down the rest of his business? And if you do not have a strategy, you do not have a planned strategy on who you're going to fund again to make sure that these businesses can get resurrected, then economy is not going to be in a great position to be. I'm going to now go back to Jayjeet. Jayjeet, if there were the first few steps you had to take to resurrect the economy back, what would you do now?
I think clearly what's at this stage, what the understanding is that one should open up as soon as possible. And it has to happen in tandem with Dr. Chatterjee was saying, educating people on how to manage a hygienic interaction. Imagine if you get into a metro where the thousands of people packed in, and there are people who are wearing a mask which is just below the nose or hanging over the chin. That will lead to a much quicker spread, and again leading to a lockdown, which has to happen if there's a rapid spread of the virus. So clearly, a opening up in tandem with huge amount of communication, of education, of telling people how to behave socially in a COVID scenario. Just to give an example, I had to be in a government office this morning, and I was insisted upon that I must have a cup of tea. And, the official I was interacting with took umbrage that I kept on refusing the cup of tea. The fact of the matter is that if I have to have a cup of tea, I have to remove my mask, and those are cultural nuances that needs to change. Just because two people are meeting, it does not mean that if you keep the mask on, you're offending the other person. These cultural nuances have to change. So that's point number one: open up the economy with large amount of education, large amount of training of the people. Second, the economy doesn't run on thin air. The lifeblood of the economy is funding. It is finance. Much of the announcement that has happened has to get translated into hard money coming in. And when you're going to the banks, and this we're talking about brass tacks, and I think there is always a disconnect between policy and what happens on the ground. Policy says, please make sure that people are taking care of themselves. What happens on the ground is police peeping into the car and checking if people are wearing masks. Similarly, policy says that you must push money into the hands of MSMEs. What happens on the ground is banks saying, well, if you've taken a moratorium, then we don't think you are the right candidate to whom we can give any funding. Even though the government is saying, well, we will be the guarantor to that fund, but still funding is not reaching to those who really need it. And therefore, a deeper thought has to go in as to how we turn on the lifeblood of the economy by ensuring that funding goes through into the economy. And the third part of it, which is the basis of capitalism, which is land, capital, and third part is labor. We need to get the labor back where they need to be, which is back into the cities, or there's a great opportunity to create more cities. The number of cities that we have in India is clearly not sufficient for any of our aspirations. We're already busting the cities, trying to manage a $3 trillion economy. If we reach $5 trillion economy, we need at least 50 more cities. We don't have that. So instead of trying to get all the labor in, can we also try and use this opportunity to actually set up more industries where the labor is, rather than getting the labor into congested cities and jacking up the cost of living and so on and so forth. But the labor has to be looked at very, very carefully. We still don't have proper labor housing. If you're doing any construction work, there is no regulation which says that you must provide proper housing and proper education to the labor and the children. And therefore, what ends up happening is that the children of the laborer, who are always by definition migrant, will again become laborers, which is not something good for the
Yeah.
economy, even in the long term. In fact,
Yeah.
alluding back to what your own documentary on pandemic, you predicted that it's going to happen. Similarly, we have been predicting for a long time that we must have an economy where everybody needs to be educated. And if you're not having that, and if you're having the children of the laborers becoming laborers, again, we are
Yeah,
not really having an economy.
skill development. This was possibly a great opportunity to have the social, physical distancing, as Dr. Chatterjee talked about it, and then develop skills because people may have sometimes literacy but zero skills to be able to do anything. And that's one of our bigger challenges, Jajit, I've seen constantly. I deal with a lot in rural India. I spend at least 3 days a week in rural India every week. And this is one of the big issues I face. So I think we are running towards the end of this show. Thank you, Jayjeet. Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Thank you, Dr. Arpita, for coming on this show and shedding a little light. I'm going to leave the show with a 1 minute video that has come out of the UN. I think it also talks about how we have to maintain our habitat, and it's going to be a very, very important part of who we are and how we move forward beyond us making sure that the last person has no virus left in them. So I'm going to leave you with this 1 minute video. Please take a look, and I think it's time for us to all think about what we will do post the pandemic. Obviously, putting our hands together and putting our thoughts together to fight this properly, and fighting this disease towards its end and creating the economy again. So thank you for joining me for the show, and over to the video.